you could be physically clean, but you're still mentally impacted by your experiences.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they call people, places, and things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if a person doesn't have a strong supportive network when they reemerge from inside these holes, to even include treatment centers, the likelihood of them going back to the old behavior is very high. Why? Because it's familiar behavior. The drug isn't the problem, the mindset is the problem, and how we see the drug is the problem.
Franklyn, I was
Okay.
doing a deep dive on the Freedom Project website last night, and I saw some data or some research that echoes what you're saying, and it talks about, of the X number of people that are coming out of prison, over 50% of them aren't getting the right tools that they need to thrive. And so I would love to know, you've seen and done so much over your life. When did you start to see that things, and I hope they have started to move in a positive direction, and laws started to get made to provide services where people could thrive? Like, when did you see that start to happen in your experience?
So for me, and it's kind of funny because it's just really one of those things that um, when you're displaced from a community and then you're dropped back off in that same community with little or no resources, you are destined to fail unless you just have a strong constitution and a will not to fail. Each time that I came back to Washington, I mean, to Seattle, Washington, after being incarcerated, and I tell people this today, I don't know anybody that walks out of a prison and say, hey, man, I'll see you when I come back. But unfortunately, we have a lot of people that do.
Mhm.
And I was one, because your social network is that subsystem that helps you move forward. As human beings, we're social beings. Okay. So if I don't have a social network that's moving in a pro-social or positive manner, then I'm gonna go back to what's familiar to me. And a lot of times our social network, to include our families, are not the best place for us to go. So for me, coming out in Freedom Project was actually, the funny, because Freedom Project is about 21, 22 years old. And it actually started with two organizations, I mean, two individuals in the Monroe Correctional Center at the Minimum Security Division. And we were all there together, Rusty Thomas and Dow Gordon, and we had this little culture club. So when I first got out, I didn't even know they created this organization out of this experiment that we had, where Jay Jackson and Lucy Liu came in and did nonviolent communication and mindfulness training. And the one thing about a lot of prison programs, and we call them prison programs because up until 2014, 2015, the majority of the programs stayed within the prison. And really, up until last year, a person like, say, yourself or Deaunte, who came in as a volunteer inside the prison to work with the population, could not have a relationship with that person for 1 year once that person resurfaced.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you did, you would violate your volunteer status.
Yeah.
That rule just changed. They finally got rid of that rest of those ridiculous rule that they could ever have.
Why did that? I mean, it does sound ridiculous. Yeah. Why did that law exist to begin with? Because, what was the purpose?
There could be
that's another episode.
That's a whole other
episode. But the thing here is, and like you said, I mean, for me, and actually one of them was Deaunte's father. Okay? Because in my world, there were a lot of people that served as good examples, but at the same time period, people knew how deadly and how devastating it was to involve yourself too closely to somebody that's on the edge. And I had a lot of people that came out of that addiction circle Now, Deaunte's father had a little towing company. They even employed me one time. I came out back when the company was called Gill's $20 Towing Service. A and we worked, we did everything. That probably was the longest time during that period that I stayed out because I stayed busy. And I went from being an alcoholic and a drug addict to a workaholic because we worked almost 24 hours a day back then. Towing people's cars at $20 a hookup, $2 a mile, and we was all over the county. But it was a beautiful thing. But unfortunately for me, that when that played out, my addiction didn't. My infatuation with crack cocaine didn't, and all it did was stick the wrong person at the right place at the right time to be able to get caught up. So it really comes back to constitution and how strong a person is, how strong a person's support system is, being able to utilize some of the tools that we learn when we're going through the 12 steps, being able to pick up the strongest tool in your box and walking people through that. So for me, the turnaround really came through doing the work that I was doing in the prison out here, because today we have what we call effective transition. The Governor's House Bill 1605, successfully transitioning people out of prison by connecting resources through the state. I don't know if Deaunte told, I was the first individual to be hired by the Department of Corrections to be the first reentry navigator.
I was getting into that. Go ahead.
To transition people from prison back to the community. And I did that for 7.5 years before I resigned 2 years ago.
How was that process for you to come in and be able to do that? I mean, you built a lot of systems in that space. I talk a lot. You'll hear me, to the listeners, you'll hear me say things about community compasses. And a lot of the work that you did, Franklyn, was a part of that community compass to kind of pull in community into for DLC to see resources that they haven't seen before. What was that process like for you?
Well, and it kind of goes back to what your dad did for me. Because it was one thing that understanding why people don't succeed was a lack of support. But then a person has to have a structure. If you're coming out of structure and you do good in structure, then you have to have a good structure to go to. So back then we have a lot of halfway or transition houses that were more traps than they were productive pathways for people. So I involved myself with one, and I created a program called Sober Solutions out in South King County with the assistance of a family who just wanted to help people to do their part to try to end homelessness. And so instead I talked them into, well, let's do this with people coming out of prison. And it started with a 2-bedroom apartment. And before I knew it, I had 13 apartment complexes. And we were servicing over 200 people. And it was that same pathway of being able to connect with people before they come out, find out what it is that they would like to do, and get them connected with resources while they were still inside. So when they came out, they had places to go. They had people that were expecting them. Their EBT or their SNAP benefits and everything was right there and ready. But in the interim, the biggest part of it was me going out and establishing relationships with community-based organizations that was doing this work. And I was amazed at how many people were out here doing the work under the radar, or that weren't getting supported by grants, or they weren't getting supported by this, but who were impacted by the system because they had family members in the system. And everybody was asking the same thing. How do we help? Well, we help by coming together. And that's what we did. We came together, we created our own little network. And from that network, we were able to funnel people through the housing program, get them connected with resources, get them working in the community. And I didn't even know that I was being tracked by the Department of Corrections at that time, or at least people in housing with the Department of Corrections who came and told me my success rate, because I'm just doing the work. I'm not tracking how many people are succeeding, how many people are not. Hell, half the people weren't even leaving. And so they were loved because people get comfortable where they're at. I was comfortable being homeless for 6 years. I was comfortable living in a tent and living down there in the jungles in downtown Seattle. So, in understanding that, if that's the model, if we know people get comfortable, why don't we get them comfortable in something that's proactive, productive, and in their interest and see how that works? And it worked real well. We had people moving straight from transitional housing through the landlord liaison project into permanent housing and then on into owning their own homes. And that's how today I have my own little cheesy thing, but my own first time home buyers class
Yeah.
that we teach people. It's a power hour that we have. We invite people to come be a part of,
Yeah.
and we answer questions about home ownership. What does that look like? Because now we're trying to reverse that model that says if limited information is what we find in our community, then let's put some constructive, powerful information back in the community.